Las Vegas, Saturday night. The city hums with neon and noise, a mirage built on adrenaline. Beneath the bright lights and casino laughter, a darker current moves quietly through the streets. It's just after 11 p.m. when a black BMW 750 pulls up to a red light on Flamingo Road. Behind the wheel, Marion Suge Knight, co-founder of Death Row Records. In the passenger seat, Tupac Amaru Shakur, 25 years old, rapper, actor, activist. His head is turned toward the crowd of fans shouting his name from passing cars. He smiles, lifts his chin, nods back. Moments earlier, he'd been at the MGM Grand, dressed in a white suit, watching Mike Tyson's heavyweight fight against Bruce Seldon. Tyson won in the first round, a knockout in under 2 minutes, the kind of swift violence Las Vegas sells in tickets. Afterward, Tupac was elated, laughing, full of energy, but that joy didn't last. Inside the MGM lobby, a confrontation erupted, a brief but brutal fight with a man later identified as Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a known South Side Crip from Compton. The scuffle was caught on hotel surveillance. Tupac in the center, throwing the first punch, followed by a swarm of men in death row jackets. Security broke it up, and the group dispersed. Tupac left the scene with Suge Knight. No one knew it then, but that hallway fight would set off the chain of events that ended his life. As the BMW sits at the intersection of Flamingo and Koval, a white Cadillac pulls up on the right side, window rolling down slowly. Witnesses later describe it as smooth, almost casual. Then, in a matter of seconds, the night explodes. Gunfire for sharp bursts. Bullets tear through the BMW. Glass shatters. Tires screech. In the passenger seat, Tupac is hit 4 times. In the chest, the arm, the thigh. Suge Knight, grazed by fragments, slams his foot on the gas. The car lurches forward, weaving through traffic, headlights reflecting off broken glass. Police arrive minutes later to a scene of chaos. Crowds gathering, sirens echoing, the BMW riddled with holes. Officers pull Tupac from the passenger side. He's bleeding heavily, still breathing, still fighting. They rush him to University Medical Center. He's placed on life support. Over the next 6 days, the world holds its breath. On the 6th night, September 13, 1996, Tupac Shakur is pronounced dead. The time of death, 4:03 p.m. He was 25. The murder shocks the world. But for those who knew the man behind the music, it felt less like a random act of violence, and more like the final chapter of a storm that had been building for years. Before there was a gunfire, the fame, the headlines, there was a boy named Tupac Amaru Shakur, a child of revolution, born into chaos, raised on the words of resistance, and destined to live fast, speak loud, and leave too soon. If you're new here, take a moment to subscribe, not for the algorithms, but because this story matters. What happened to Tupac Shakur isn't just a murder mystery. It's a mirror reflecting art, power, race, and a generation's voice cut short. Now, to understand how the streets of Las Vegas became a war zone that night, we must go back, far before Death Row, before the Platinum Records, before the name Tupac carried legend. We go back to the beginning, before the fame, before the bulletproof vest, before the name Tupac became myth. There was simply Tupac Amaru Shakur. He was born on June 16, 1971, in the East Harlem section of New York City. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a proud, defiant member of the Black Panther Party, and his father, Billy Garland, was also a Panther. His very name carried a revolution. Tupac Amaru, taken from the last Incan emperor, who was executed by the Spanish for leading a rebellion Afeni once said, "I wanted him to have the name of revolutionary leaders. I wanted him to know he's part of something." That spirit of defiance shaped him before he could even walk. When Afeni was pregnant with Tupac, she was on trial with 20 other Panthers in a case known as the Panther 21. They were accused of plotting bombings across New York City. Afeni represented herself in court while carrying her unborn son, faced over 300 years in prison if convicted. She won. The jury acquitted her of all charges. 1 month later, Tupac was born. His first breaths came in a world that was already watching his mother as an enemy of the state. That kind of beginning leaves a mark. Afeni struggled to raise him, moving between New York, Baltimore, and eventually California. The family lived in poverty, constantly shifting apartments, sometimes relying on the kindness of strangers. But even then, Tupac's mind was sharp. He was reading newspapers at 5, writing poetry at 12. He once said in an interview, "I was given a game before I even wanted it." At age 12, he joined a Harlem theater group, acting in a production of A Raisin in the Sun. It was his first time on stage, and the first hint of what he'd later become, an artist who could command attention, who could make an audience feel. But behind the art was constant struggle. Afeni's drug addiction worsened as the years went on, and their relationship became a painful cycle of love, disappointment, and forgiveness. Tupac loved his mother deeply, but he never forgot the chaos. He would later immortalize in his song, "Dear Mama," rapping, "Even as a crack fiend, Mama, you always was a black queen, Mama." Those words weren't written out of pity. They were a tribute, the son's way of forgiving the mother who taught him a fight, even when life felt unwinnable. By the mid-1980s, Tupac's family moved to Baltimore, Maryland, a city that was struggling under poverty and violence. But for Tupac, Baltimore was also the place where his voice found structure. He enrolled in the Baltimore School for the Arts, where he studied theater, poetry, and ballet. There, he met Jada Pinkett, a classmate who would become one of his closest friends. Jada later said, "He was one of the most passionate people I'd ever met. He had a sense that he was destined for something." Tupac was a top student. His teachers called him intelligent, inquisitive, almost too aware. But outside school, he was still surrounded by poverty, crime, and systemic tension. That contrast between creativity and chaos became his identity. He performed Shakespeare during the day and wrote rap lyrics at night. His teachers remember him quoting Macbeth one moment, then spitting freestyles in the hallway the next. He was drawn to political thought, reading books like The Prince by Machiavelli and The Art of War. He once told a classmate, "They're going to hear me one day. The world going to hear me." In 1988, when Tupac was 17, Afeni decided to move again, this time to Marin City, California. It was a small, tough neighborhood north of San Francisco, worlds away from the arts halls of Baltimore. That move marked a turning point. From poetic dreamer to the young man who would soon call himself Tupac. Baltimore had made him an artist. California would make him a soldier. When Tupac Shakur arrived in Marin City, California, in 1988, he was 17 and restless. Baltimore had shown him culture, art, and expression, but California showed him survival. Marin City was small, less than 3,000 people, nestled near the wealth of Sausalito and the Bay. But the difference was staggering. The hills were lined with public housing, unemployment was high, and the police presence was constant. Poverty and potential sat side by side, and Tupac felt both pressing in on him. He didn't have much. No car, no steady income, no security. But he had words and a burning need to use them. He wrote constantly, poetry, letters, rhymes. His notebooks were full of ideas about justice, loyalty, fear, love, and anger. He told a friend, "They got money to go to space, but they can't feed people down here." It wasn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It was awareness. He saw his mother struggle, saw his friends harassed by police, saw dreams shrink under pressure. That awareness became his fuel. In Marin City, he met Layla Steinberg, a young educator and activist who recognized something rare in him. She hosted poetry circles at her home, where kids from rough backgrounds came to read, debate, and write. Tupac stood out immediately. Layla later said, "He was magnetic. He could speak and make people cry, make them think, make them angry, all in one sentence." Under her mentorship, he began to shape his voice, not just as a rapper, but as a messenger. He read books on civil rights, the Black Panthers, and political theory. He believed hip-hop could be more than music. It could be protest. Around this time, Tupac joined a local rap group called Strictly Dope. They performed small gigs, recorded demo tapes, and tried to get noticed. One of those tapes made its way into the hands of a group that was already making waves in the West Coast hip-hop scene, Digital Underground. Digital Underground was known for their humor and wild stage presence. Their frontman, Shock G, was charismatic, creative, and when he heard Tupac's demo, he knew instantly. Shock G would later say he was young, but he had something you couldn't fake: hunger. In 1990, Tupac joined the group as a roadie and backup dancer. He toured with them, learned stagecraft, and absorbed everything: how to command a crowd, how to move with rhythm, how to perform. But he wasn't content to stay in the background. He kept writing, and soon his verses began to appear on Digital Underground records. His first official debut came in 1991 on the song Same Song. It wasn't just a feature, it was a statement. When he rapped, "Tupac, go ahead and rock this," he wasn't asking for permission. He was introducing himself to the world. That same year, he signed with Interscope Records, marking the start of his solo career. His debut album, Tupacalypse Now, dropped in November 1991. It wasn't a commercial blockbuster, but it was revolutionary. The lyrics were raw, political, unfiltered. He spoke about police brutality, racism, and poverty, things that mainstream America didn't want to hear. "On Trapped," he rapped. "They got me trapped, can barely walk the city streets, without a cop harassing me, searching me, then asking my identity." For young black men across the country, those words weren't just lyrics. They were truth. But for politicians and the media, Tupac became a threat. Vice President Dan Quayle publicly condemned the album, saying, "There's no reason for a record like this to be released. It has no place in our society." Tupac responded in interviews calmly but firmly, saying, "I'm not saying I'm right or wrong, but I'm saying I'm real. I'm speaking what I see." That tension between truth and controversy would follow him for the rest of his career. His music gave voice to the voiceless, but also made him a target. Every lyric, every headline, every arrest fed into a larger story, a story that the world would later use to define him, even after death. By the end of 1992, Tupac was no longer just an artist. He was a cultural force, the embodiment of a generation that felt unheard. But fame came fast, too fast, and with fame came conflict. As his career rose, so did the tension between the art and the life that inspired it. The same system he spoke out against seemed to close in tighter every year. He once told MTV, I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world." He was only 21. He had no idea how right he was, or how little time he had left. By 1993, Tupac Shakur was no longer the hungry poet from Baltimore or the unknown backup dancer for Digital Underground. He was now a national voice, young, fiery, and impossible to ignore. His second studio album, Strictly for My NGZ, released that year, was both a declaration and a challenge. The title alone forced people to look closer, to confront a word that America had long used to divide and degrade. But in Tupac's world, it meant something different. Never ignorant getting goals accomplished, a redefinition, a reclamation. The album was louder, more aggressive, more confident than Tupacalypse now. It carried hits like Keep Your Head Up and I Get Around. One song spoke to the brokenness of the world. The other celebrated life, charisma, and escape. That duality, poet and player, philosopher and provocateur, became his identity. Keep Your Head Up was a love letter to women, especially single mothers, a tribute to strength and struggle. He rapped, "And since we all came from a woman, got our name from a woman, and our game from a woman." It was empathy set to rhythm, raw and heartfelt. But even as he gained respect as a lyricist, Tupac's personal life was spiraling into constant turbulence. He was arrested multiple times in the early 90s on assault charges, altercations, and confrontations that blurred the line between celebrity and chaos. Some charges were exaggerated, others legitimate. But every headline built a portrait, one the media painted in black and white. To many journalists, he was a thug. To his community, he was a truth-teller who refused to bow. And for Tupac, the media's obsession only fueled his resolve. He once told an interviewer, "They label me a troublemaker because I won't shut up, because I'm not polite. I'm not perfect, but I'm real." In 1992, he made his film debut in Juice. It was his breakout performance. He played Bishop, a charismatic young man consumed by power and paranoia. The character was dangerous, unpredictable, magnetic, and eerily prophetic. The line between art and life began to blur. Critics praised his performance, calling him a natural actor, but the streets started whispering. Tupac wasn't acting. Soon came Poetic Justice in 1993, opposite Janet Jackson. The film showed a softer side, a man torn between pain and love. It was the first time mainstream Hollywood began to see Tupac not just as a rapper, but as a leading man. Behind the camera, though, the chaos continued. In August of that year, he was involved in an altercation outside a music festival in Marin City that ended with a 6-year-old boy, QID Walker-Teal, being killed by a stray bullet. Though Tupac wasn't charged, the incident haunted him. He attended the boy's funeral and quietly paid for the family's expenses. He later said, "I carry that with me every day." His fame grew, but so did the tension around him. Police harassment became routine. In Atlanta, he was arrested for shooting 2 off-duty police officers who had allegedly assaulted a black motorist. The charges were later dropped when it was revealed the officers were intoxicated and carrying stolen guns. For many young black men in America, Tupac became a symbol of resistance, someone who stood up to power and didn't flinch. For others, he became a threat. As 1994 approached, Tupac's world was splitting into 2 realities. On one side, he was a millionaire artist, starring in major films, celebrated for his lyrics and his fearlessness. On the other, he was constantly surrounded by danger, legal battles, feuds, and paranoia. He began forming the idea of thug life, But to him, it wasn't glorification. It was code. He said, "Thug life is a hate you give little infants that F asterisk asterisk as everybody. It's what society gives us and what we pass on." Asterisk. He had it tattooed across his stomach, not as a threat, but as a warning, a statement. He explained, "It's a movement for everybody that's been oppressed, everybody that's been poor." But not everyone understood. To the media, it became an image, bulletproof vests, bandanas, the scowl. They didn't hear the meaning behind it. They saw danger, not message. By the end of 1994, Tupac was one of the most recognized figures in hip-hop, but recognition came with a cost. Rumors began to swirl. Feuds, betrayals, industry politics. The East Coast, West Coast tension that would soon define the culture was beginning to form like a storm cloud. Tupac, once a poet from Baltimore, was now caught between empires. Friends becoming rivals, labels becoming kingdoms. The same fire that made him rise was beginning to burn uncontrollably. And then, in November 1994, everything changed. A robbery, a shooting, a betrayal that would ignite one of the most infamous rivalries in music history and send Tupac on a path toward the night of September 7th, 1996. By the end of 1994, Tupac Shakur was at the height of his fame and the edge of his sanity. His words were everywhere. His face was on magazine covers, posters, and courtroom walls. But the higher he climbed, the more dangerous the air became. There was money, yes, but there was also paranoia. He was surrounded by people whose loyalty felt conditional, whose smiles didn't always reach their eyes. The industry was shifting beneath him, and he could feel it. In the fall of that year, he was recording in New York City, working with other artists at Quad Recording Studios in Times Square, a place that should have been safe ground for any musician. But that night, it wasn't. On November 30th, 1994, Tupac entered the lobby of the studio, gold jewelry flashing under the fluorescent lights, a cigarette between his fingers. He was there to record a verse for another artist's project. As he walked toward the elevators, 3 men appeared, wearing army fatigues. In seconds, the air changed. The men pulled guns. Tupac froze. "Give it up," one of them shouted. Tupac resisted. Shots rang out. He was hit 5 times, in the head, groin, and hand. He collapsed but remained conscious. He later said, "They were smiling the whole time. It wasn't just robbery, it was personal." The attackers fled. Tupac, bleeding and furious, got up and stumbled into the elevator, rode it to the studio where Biggie Smalls, Sean Puffy Combs, and others were waiting upstairs. He remembered the looks, the silence. He later told Vibe magazine, "They just stood there. They didn't help. They looked shocked, like they'd seen a ghost." He believed that someone, maybe not Biggie directly, but someone in that circle, had known what was going to happen. It was a seed of betrayal that would soon grow into the East Coast, West Coast war. At the hospital later, he said, "I've got enemies I don't even know about." He survived the attack, miraculously, but something in him changed forever that night. The paranoia turned into fury, and that fury would soon consume him. Weeks later, he was sentenced to prison for a 1993 sexual assault conviction, a case that he maintained was built on lies and manipulation. The details were murky, controversial, and debated for decades. But the impact was clear. Tupac felt abandoned. By the industry, by the friends he once trusted, by the system he had always fought against. As he was led away in handcuffs, he looked into the cameras and said, "I'm innocent. I didn't rape her. I'm being set up." The image of him entering the courtroom, head high, middle finger raised, became one of the most iconic, defiant moments in hip-hop history. Inside prison, Tupac began to change again. He read endlessly philosophy, politics, war. He wrote letters, poetry, and songs. He started to understand that survival, in his world, was never just physical. It was mental, spiritual, and political. In one interview from behind bars, he said, "I'm in jail, but I'm free inside my mind. They can't lock that up." The fire inside him was still alive. It just needed fuel. That fuel would come in the form of a visit from a man who would alter the course of his life. Marion Suge Knight, co-founder of Death Row Records. Suge offered Tupac a lifeline. Freedom in exchange for signing with Death Row. The deal was made. In October 1995, after nearly a year in prison, Tupac Shakur walked out of Clinton Correctional Facility, wearing a death row medallion, his spirit hardened, his mission sharpened. Outside the prison gates, reporters shouted questions. He didn't stop. He just looked at the cameras and said, "You'll hear from me soon." And they would. The man who left that prison wasn't the same artist who wrote "Keep Your Head Up." He was angrier, sharper, more distrustful. The poet was still there, but the soldier had taken control. Tupac was now armed with new music, new enemies, and new home on the West Coast under Death Row Records, a label known for its power, its influence, and its violence. The stage was set. The rivalry lines were drawn, and somewhere the storm was gathering. The gates of Clinton Correctional Facility opened on a cold October morning in 1995. Tupac Shakur stepped into the sunlight, leaner, sharper, and quieter than before. He'd spent 11 months behind bars, and the world outside had changed. But so had he. Waiting for him was Suge Knight, towering in a red jacket, smiling beneath dark sunglasses. Behind him, the black convoy of Death Row Records. It wasn't just a pickup, it was a resurrection. Suge walked up, shook Tupac's hand, and said, "Welcome home, Pac. Let's get to work." That handshake sealed a deal that would change music forever. Suge had paid $1.4 million to bail Tupac out in exchange for 3 albums under Death Row. Tupac accepted because he wanted freedom, money, and revenge. He wanted a new empire. From that moment, Tupac Shakur wasn't just an artist. He was a weapon. Within weeks, Tupac was in the studio. The sessions were intense, almost manic. He barely slept, rapping for hours, writing verses on napkins, recording track after track. Producers said he'd come in with fire in his eyes, ready to prove something to everyone who doubted him. Between October and December 1995, he recorded All Eyes on Me, one of hip-hop's first double albums. 27 tracks of pain, pride, paranoia, and power. Songs like Ambitions as a Writer, Only God Can Judge Me, and California Love weren't just hits. They were declarations. A man saying to the world, "You thought I was finished. I'm just getting started." In one of his interviews, Tupac explained, "I want to make an album that showed everything. The party, the pain, the politics. Because I live all that. I'm not just one thing." The album dropped on February 13, 1996, just one day before Valentine's Day. It sold 500,000 copies in its first week. By summer, it was certified multi-platinum. The music videos, California Love with Dr. Dre, 2 of America's Most Wanted with Snoop Dogg, made him a global superstar. He was everywhere, on MTV, on talk shows and films. But behind the success, something darker was rising. Death Row Records was more than a label. It was a world unto itself. Inside its offices, Loyalty was currency, and fear was policy. Suge Knight ruled like a general. His red suits, his entourage, the presence of ex-gang members, it all gave Death Row a reputation that blurred the line between music and menace. Tupac fit right in, or maybe he forced himself to. He called Suge Big Bro, rolled with mob Pyru Bloods, and started wearing more red. He wanted protection, but also belonging. At the same time, the East Coast, West Coast rivalry was reaching a fever pitch. What started as competition had turned into open hostility. Magazines fueled it. Radio shows provoked it. Fans picked sides. In one interview, Tupac said, "I'm not against the East Coast. I'm against those fake-ass rappers who front like they're real. I'm from the streets. I live what I rap." But the target was clear. He was talking about the notorious B.I.G. and Bad Boy records. To Tupac, Biggie betrayed him, or at least stood silent when betrayal came. He released Hit 'Em Up, one of the most infamous diss tracks in music history. First off, F asterisk 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 should be asterisk 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 asterisk, and the clique you claim. It was raw, violent, unapologetic. The track shook the entire industry. Even friends tried to talk him out of it. But Tupac wasn't listening anymore. He was in too deep. The media turned it into a spectacle. East versus West. Pac versus Biggie. What had started as music had become war. Even as tensions rose, Tupac's star burned brighter than ever. He was starring in films like Gridlocked and Gang Related, showing audiences that he was more than a rapper. He was a storyteller. On set, co-stars describe him as magnetic, unpredictable, but deeply charismatic. Actor Tim Roth said he had this energy like he was racing against time. And maybe he was, because everywhere Tupac went, he felt watched by rivals, by police, by death itself. He once said in an interview, "I feel like I'm living on borrowed time. I don't think I'll live past 25. He was 24. The contradictions in his life were widening. He'd preach unity in interviews, then fuel feuds in songs. He'd donate to schools and shelters, then throw punches in clubs. He wanted peace, but couldn't stop fighting. He wanted love, but trusted no one. Inside Death Row, cracks were forming. Dr. Dre quietly distanced himself from Suge Knight. Snoop Dogg grew uneasy with the violence that seemed to follow them everywhere. Tupac, meanwhile, was talking about breaking away. Started his own label called Machiavelli Records. He told his crew, "I'm going to do my own thing. Suge got his empire. I need mine." But walking away from Death Row was easier said than done. And in 1996, loyalty had a price. By September 1996, tensions were boiling over. That month, Tupac traveled to Las Vegas to attend a Mike Tyson fight. Tyson versus Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand. It was supposed to be a celebration, a night of glamour, power, and high stakes. Tupac arrived in a black BMW, wearing a white suit and gold chains. Suge Knight drove. They sat ringside as Tyson won by knockout in just 109 seconds. After the fight, Tupac was in high spirits, laughing, taking photos, shaking hands. But as the crowd poured into the casino, fate intervened. In the lobby, Tupac spotted a man, Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, a known member of the Southside Crips. Earlier that year, Anderson had allegedly robbed one of Death Row's associates. Tupac, acting on impulse, charged at him. Security cameras caught it. The fight, the chaos, the punches. It lasted less than a minute, but it would echo for decades. Afterward, Tupac returned to his hotel suite. He showered, change into a new outfit: black jeans, a green jersey, a gold medallion. He called his girlfriend Kid Ada Jones. They planned to meet later that night. He didn't know it, but the wheels of tragedy were already turning. At 10:55 p.m., Tupac and Suge Knight left the MGM Grand, heading to a death row after-party at Club 662. Tupac sat in the passenger seat of a black BMW sedan, music blasting through the speakers. "How You Want It?" The Las Vegas Strip lights danced across the windshield. Behind them, a convoy of cars followed. Friends, bodyguards, associates. At a red light on Flamingo Road, Tupac flirted with women in a white Cadillac next to them. He laughed, flashing that familiar grin. It was one of the last times anyone saw him truly happy. A few minutes later, as they stopped again, another white Cadillac pulled up on their right. This time, the window rolled down, and the night exploded. Pop, 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 pop. For bullets tore through the car door, striking Tupac in the chest, arm, and thigh. Suge was grazed in the head but kept driving, blood on his face, panic in his eyes. He shouted, "Pac, you okay?" Tupac gasped, "I can't breathe." The BMW swerved down the strip, tires screeching, smoke filling the night. Police and ambulances arrived within minutes. Tupac was rushed to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada. He was unconscious, but alive, barely. The city lights kept glowing. The crowds kept partying. But for the next 6 days, the world would hold its breath. The desert air was still warm that night. The lights of Las Vegas shimmered, indifferent to what had just happened. At 11:15 p.m., on September 7, 1996, the call came through. Shots fired on Flamingo Road. A black BMW riddled with bullets. 2 men down. One of them was Tupac Amaru Shakur. When paramedics arrived, they found him slumped in the passenger seat, unconscious, bleeding heavily, his breathing shallow. Suge Knight stood nearby, dazed, shouting for help. His head was bleeding, but his focus never left the car. As Tupac was lifted onto a stretcher, one of the paramedics later recalled, "Even with everything, you could tell who he was. The tattoos, the jewelry, there was a strange quiet. Like everyone knew what this moment meant." The ambulance sped toward University Medical Center, sirens echoing down the strip. The world's most famous rapper was fighting for his life. Inside the trauma unit, doctors worked frantically. Tupac had multiple gunshot wounds, one to the chest that pierced his lung, another to the thigh, and 2 more in his arm. He was placed on life support, with machines keeping him breathing. Outside the hospital, fans began to gather. By morning, hundreds lined the streets, some praying, some crying, some blasting his songs from car stereos. Suge Knight, bruised but alive, told reporters, "Tupac's gonna pull through. He's a fighter." Afeni Shakur, his mother, arrived the next day. Calm, focused. She had been here before. She'd watched her son battle the system, violence, and himself. Now, she faced his greatest fight yet. Inside the hospital room, she spoke softly to him. "Baby, it's Mama. You're safe now. You can rest." But he didn't wake. Doctors kept him sedated, afraid that moving him would trigger more bleeding. His lung had collapsed. His body was failing. Outside, rumors spread who shot Tupac. Some blamed the Southside Crips, revenge for the earlier fight with Orlando Anderson. Others whispered it was Biggie Smalls or Bad Boy Records, retaliation in the ongoing East Coast-West Coast feud. The theories multiplied. The truth, as always, remained buried beneath the noise. Detectives from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department arrived within hours. They found shell casings from a .40 caliber Glock, but there were no witnesses willing to talk. In the convoy of cars behind Tupac and Suge that night, not one bodyguard could provide a clear description of the shooters. Some claimed they were blinded by the lights. Others said they didn't see the car until it was gone. The white Cadillac, the shooter's vehicle, disappeared into the night. Detective Brent Becker, one of the first on scene, later said, "It was chaos. People were yelling, crying. No one wanted to cooperate. You could feel the fear. Even in Vegas, people were scared to talk." Police questioned Suge Knight, who insisted he didn't know who fired the shots. They tracked down Orlando Anderson a few days later, the man Tupac had fought at the MGM Grand, and brought him in for questioning. Anderson denied everything. He was released for lack of evidence. That decision would haunt the case for decades. As Tupac lay in critical condition, the media turned the story into a global spectacle. Every network ran continuous coverage. Outside the hospital, news vans parked side by side, their satellite dishes pointed toward the desert sky. Fans held vigils across Los Angeles, New York, and Oakland. Candlelight flickered beneath murals of his face. People played Dear Mama, So Many Tears, Life Goes On, songs that now sounded like premonitions. Inside, Afeni refused to let the machines define his spirit. She demanded dignity for her son, privacy, peace. She told the press, "My son is strong. My son is a warrior. Whatever happens, it will be God's will." On the sixth day, the machines kept humming. Monitors blinked softly. And then on September 13th, 1996, at 4:03 p.m., Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead. He was 25 years old. The world stopped. Radio stations fell silent for a full minute. News anchors stumbled over their words. Outside the hospital, the crowd began to cry, some openly, some quietly, others screaming in disbelief. Suge Knight arrived later that evening. He didn't speak to reporters. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground. Within hours, the blame game began. Some said it was the Crips, revenge for the MGM beating. Others said it was a setup, that someone inside death row wanted Tupac gone. A few even suggested that the FBI had orchestrated it, seeing Tupac as a threat due to his political influence and growing activism. No theory could be proven. No arrest was made. The Las Vegas police struggled to gather solid evidence. Witnesses refused to cooperate. Bodyguards changed their stories. Key figures disappeared. Meanwhile, the East Coast-West Coast tension hit a breaking point. People feared retaliation. That Biggie would be next. And 6 months later, he was. In the days following his death, the world tried to process what had happened. His body was cremated. Some of his ashes, according to legend, were mixed with marijuana and smoked by members of his group, the Outlaws. His last recorded album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory, released just 2 months later under the name Machiavelli, felt prophetic. On the cover, Tupac, depicted as Jesus on the cross. Inside, lyrics filled with foreboding. Expect me like you expect Jesus to come back. The album shocked fans and critics alike. To many, it felt like Tupac had predicted his own death. To others, it was proof that he had faked it, that he'd gone into hiding. Rumors spread like wildfire. People claimed to see him in Cuba, in Mexico, in South Africa. Grainy photos and whispered stories kept the myth alive. But behind the conspiracy theories was a deeper truth. Tupac had become something larger than life, a symbol A martyr, a warning. Afeni Shakur took charge of his estate, ensuring his message lived on through posthumous albums, foundations, and films. She said, Tupac's work wasn't about fame. It was about freedom. He gave his life for that. And even as the case went cold, his words continued to echo. They got money for wars but can't feed the poor. Reality is wrong. Dreams are for real. Long live the rose that grew from concrete. He had become immortal, not because he lived forever, but because his truth refused to die. The news of Tupac's death spread across the globe in minutes. Headlines screamed from every corner of the world. Tupac Shakur dead at 25. Rap star gunned down in Las Vegas. East Coast, West Coast war claims another life. But behind the headlines, behind the candlelight vigils, the music sales, the mourning, something far quieter was happening. A murder investigation was already beginning to unravel. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was unprepared. Detectives were overwhelmed by the media attention, the celebrity status of the victim, and the intimidating aura of death row records. From the very beginning, critical evidence went missing. The BMW Tupac had been shot and was never properly preserved. No fingerprints, no ballistic matches, no shell casings tied directly to a suspect. Detective Brent Becker, one of the first on the case, would later say, "It wasn't that we didn't care. It's that we were up against a wall. No one wanted to talk. No one. Witnesses refused to cooperate, some out of loyalty, others out of fear. Even Suge Knight, the only other person in the car, was vague in his statements. He told police, I didn't see who did it. I just heard shots. When pressed, he repeated the same answer. No details, no description. The culture of silence was immediate. Death row associates clammed up. Hotel employees who'd witnessed the MGM Grand fight kept quiet. And in Los Angeles, the streets had their own code. Don't talk to the police. By the time detectives pieced together a timeline, days had passed. Crucial footage had been lost. Tips had gone cold. And in that silence, the legend began to grow. Behind the scenes, investigators did have a lead: Orlando Baby Lane Anderson, the man Tupac and his entourage had beaten just hours before the shooting. Anderson was a member of the Southside Crips, a rival set to bloods that many in Death Row's inner circle were affiliated with. To detectives, it looked like a clear motive: revenge. They brought him in for questioning. He denied everything. I didn't shoot Tupac, he said. I was at the MGM, yeah, but I went home after that. With no weapon, no witnesses willing to testify, and no confession, police had to let him go. It was a decision that would haunt the case forever. Over the years, Anderson would remain a shadowy figure in the Tupac narrative. Always nearby, never proven guilty. He gave interviews insisting he had nothing to do with the murder. In 1998, he was killed in a gang-related shootout in Compton, taking whatever truth he had to the grave. The case lost its main suspect, and with him, its momentum. Meanwhile, inside Death Row Records, the walls were closing in. The label was under federal investigation for gang ties, money laundering, and racketeering. The FBI and LAPD had both been monitoring Suge Knight's operations for months before Tupac's murder. Agents believed Death Row had blurred the lines between business and street warfare, that it had become a magnet for violence and fear. Dr. Dre had already left the label by the time of Tupac's death, calling Death Row too dark, too dangerous. Snoop Dogg would soon follow. Snoop later said in an interview, "After Pac died, I felt like I was next. Everything around us was chaos. Suge was in survival mode. Nobody trusted anybody. Even Afeni Shakur expressed suspicion about Death Row's role, telling journalists that her son had been planning to leave the label to start Machiavelli Records. He was ready to build something of his own, she said. He didn't want to be owned anymore. Some believe that decision may have sealed his fate, because in Death Row's world, independence could be dangerous. As the official investigation slowed, unofficial theories took over. Some believe Tupac's death was the final act of the East Coast-West Coast feud, a retaliatory hit orchestrated by Bad Boy Records. But Biggie Smalls publicly denied it. He told MTV, "Me and Pac, we had differences, but I ain't had nothing to do with that. I'm hurt. We lost a good one." 6 months later, Biggie himself would be killed in Los Angeles, shot in a drive-by eerily similar to Tupac's. 2 rap giants gone within half a year. 2 murders unsolved. Others pointed to the FBI. They noted that Tupac was politically outspoken, the son of former Black Panther members. He had been watched by federal agencies since his teens. Some claimed the government saw him as a threat, a revolutionary voice capable of mobilizing millions. A declassified FBI file would later confirm that they had been tracking Tupac in death row for years, citing his influence as potentially disruptive. Then there was a theory that refused to die, that Tupac had faked his own death. Fans noted the alias Machiavelli, inspired by Niccolò Machiavelli, the Italian philosopher who wrote about staging one's death to outwit enemies. The posthumous album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory, released under that name, only fueled the speculation. Lines like, "Expect me," like you expect Jesus to come back, felt less like lyrics and more like clues. But the truth remained buried under layers of myth, grief, and fear. Years passed. Tupac's case sat in a cold file room in Las Vegas. Occasional leads surfaced, new witnesses, gang members seeking deals, rumors from Compton and South Central. But none of it stuck. Detective Tim Brennan, who worked the Compton gang unit, later told reporters, "We knew who did it. We knew it was retaliation. But no one wanted to testify. Everyone involved was either dead or too scared to talk." Every time someone tried to reopen the case, they hit the same wall: silence. The people who could have solved it were gone. Tupac, Biggie, Orlando Anderson. Even Suge Knight would later be imprisoned for an unrelated crime, never giving clear answers. The case became less an investigation and more a legend. For fans, Tupac became a ghost that refused arrest. Every time a new documentary aired, every time a lost song was released, the question returned: who killed Tupac Shakur? While police work stalled, Afeni Shakur turned grief into movement. She established the Tupac Amaru Shakur Foundation, dedicated to youth arts and empowerment. She guarded her son's legacy fiercely, overseeing his posthumous albums, films, and estate. "They killed my son," she once said, "but they can't kill what he stood for." Through her, Tupac's words continue to echo, from classrooms to protests, from street corners to stages. She made sure his voice never went silent again. The years after Tupac's death were not a period of mourning. They were an eruption. His voice refused to fade. His music kept appearing, new albums, unreleased verses, songs that sounded like messages from beyond. To the world, Tupac wasn't gone. He was amplified. Death Row Records wasted no time. Within 2 months of his murder, the label released the Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory, under the alias Machiavelli. The album cover, haunting. It showed Tupac crucified, wearing only a loincloth, with the words "in the event of my demise" written inside the liner notes. recorded in just 7 days. It carried an urgency that felt prophetic. Tracks like Hail Mary, Against All Odds, and Blasphemy sounded like premonitions, as if he knew what was coming. In Hail Mary, Tupac raps, "I ain't a killer, but don't push me / revenge is like the sweetest joy next to getting pussy. Come with me, Hail Mary, run quick see / what do we have here now?" The tone is cold, measured. It's not the anger of all eyes on me. It's resignation, like a man who'd seen his fate written long before the bullets flew. The album ignited more rumors than it silenced. The alias Machiavelli was a direct reference to Niccolò Machiavelli, the Renaissance thinker who wrote about deception and power, and who, according to popular myth, faked his own death. Fans began dissecting every lyric, every symbol. Some swore Tupac was alive, that he'd escaped, that the shooting was staged, that Suge Knight orchestrated the illusion. Even years later, interviews with Suge fanned the flames. He'd smirk and say things like, "Tupac's not dead. He's somewhere smiling." Whether it was trolling or truth, no one could tell. But the myth grew. As the 90s faded, Tupac's ghost became an industry. His posthumous releases, Until the End of Time, Better Daisy, Loyal to the Game, Pax Life, all top charts. Each project sounded like a new chapter, but behind the success was controversy. Who controlled his voice? Who profited from his pain? Afeni Shakur, ever the revolutionary, stepped in to protect her son's legacy. She founded Amaru Entertainment, reclaiming Tupac's masters and ensuring the profits funded educational and community programs. But it wasn't easy. Lawsuits followed. Rights battles erupted. Greed circled like vultures. In a 2003 interview, Afeni said quietly, "My son believed in the people. I'm trying to make sure his words don't get used against them." Meanwhile, hip-hop was shifting. Jay-Z, Nas, Eminem, and others carried the torch, citing Tupac as inspiration. The one who made vulnerability powerful, who fused poetry with rage. Yet the culture around him, violence, bravado, fatalism, still lingered. When the notorious B.I.G. was killed 6 months after Tupac, it felt like the end of an era. 2 voices silenced, 2 coasts bleeding. The industry changed forever. But Tupac's reach only expanded into classrooms, murals, tattoos, political debates. His name became shorthand for truth-telling in the face of a system designed to silence dissent. As the decades passed, the obsession with who killed Tupac only grew. Some blamed Orlando Anderson, the Crip from the MGM fight. Anderson denied involvement until his own death in 1998. Shot in a car wash in Compton. Others believed Suge Knight had motives to control death row, to silence Tupac before he left the label. Suge always denied it. Detectives, journalists, and fans all drew their own maps. One theory suggested a setup that the Las Vegas police, already aware of the tensions, looked the other way. Another theory claimed it was retaliation for earlier shootings. Gang politics tangled with music business power plays. Then came the documentaries. Tupac Resurrection, Unsolved, the murders of Tupac and the notorious B.I.G. and who killed Tupac. Each promised closure. Each ended with more questions. In 2018, former LAPD detective Greg Kading, who'd investigated the Biggie case, released murder rap, alleging that Keith D., uncle of Orlando Anderson, had confessed to being in the car during the drive-by. Kading's version of events painted a chain of retaliation that began months earlier, with pride and gang affiliation driving the trigger. Still, there was no official resolution, no trial, no conviction, only shadows. Decades later, In 2023, a seismic shift. Las Vegas police arrested Dwayne Keith D. Davis, the same man who had publicly boasted of his connection to the crime for years. He was charged with the murder of Tupac Shakur. In press conferences, authorities cited Davis's own words, interviews, memoirs, and recorded statements, where he described the events of that night in chilling detail. He claimed to have been in the white Cadillac on the right side of Suge and Tupac's BMW. It was payback, he said in one televised clip. That night, we were going to get him. He alleged that the gun was passed to one of the back seat passengers, likely Orlando Anderson, who opened fire. But decades after the shooting, evidence was thin. Witnesses were gone. Suge Knight, incarcerated, refused to testify. Davis pleaded not guilty. His trial at the time of this recording is still pending. For many, the arrest came too late. Justice delayed until it was barely justice at all. But for others, it reignited the wound. The murder of Tupac Shakur was no longer a cold case. It was alive again, breathing through the courts. Tupac's story doesn't end with a verdict. It lives in reflection, in the contradictions that made him human. He was a poet who wrote about revolution, and a man who raged at his enemies. He spoke about love, but often carried hate. He dreamed of peace, but lived surrounded by violence. To his mother, he was a son. To the world, he became a prophet. And yet, the tragedy of Tupac Shakur isn't that he died young. It's that his death revealed how America consumes its icons. It loves them until they threaten power. Then it buries them under myth. Today, murals of Tupac stretch across walls in Johannesburg, Oakland, London, and Havana. His words are studied in universities. His image floats in holograms on Coachella stages. His voice, remixed, reinterpreted, still commands silence. Tupac once said, "I'm not saying I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world." And he did. It's been decades since the night Las Vegas fell silent under flashing lights and sirens. And still, Tupac's name hasn't faded. If anything, it's grown, stretched beyond music, beyond death, into something immortal. In the years that followed, his image reappeared everywhere. On murals, T-shirts, documentaries, murals, classroom walls. To many, he became less a person and more movement, the embodiment of raw truth. In 2001, a new generation rediscovered him when Until the End of Time dropped, a double album compiled from unreleased recordings. It debuted at number 1. The message was clear. Tupac's words still had power, still carried relevance, still spoke to anger and struggle that hadn't gone away. And Until the End of Time, his voice echoes over a slow, haunting beat. Perhaps I was addicted to the dark side, / somewhere inside my childhood witnessed my heart die. It felt prophetic, not just about his own fate, but about the cycle that continued long after he was gone. Poverty, racism, incarceration, violence. The same forces that shaped him were still claiming new lives in the streets he once walked. His mother, Afeni Shakur, devoted the rest of her life to making sure her son's legacy wasn't reduced to tragedy. Through the Tupac Amaru Shakur Foundation, she built community centers, art programs, and scholarships. She spoke often about how Tupac wanted to be remembered, not as a gangster, but as a revolutionary spirit. "My son had big dreams," she once said, "and he lived every single one, even the nightmares." By the early 2000s, Tupac had transcended celebrity. He had become legend. But that transformation came with distortion. Conspiracy theories spread online, thousands of fans analyzing lyrics, photos, and interviews for clues that he'd faked his death. They pointed to songs like Blasphemy and Life of an Outlaw, where Tupac rapped about being reborn. They studied album covers that depicted clocks stopped at 4:03, the time of his death. They claimed to see him in Cuba, in South Africa, in Los Angeles. The Machiavelli persona had become a mythic mask, both a shield and a symbol. It represented transformation, survival, a final act of rebellion against a system that had always tried to silence him. Some called it denial, the refusal to accept his death, but others saw it differently. They saw in Machiavelli a metaphor, that even if the man was gone, the message had resurrected itself. "You try to silence me," Tupac once said in an interview, "but my words gone live longer than you." And he was right. After Tupac's death, hip-hop changed. The genre split into eras, before and after 1996. Before, rap had been raw, political, confessional. After, it became increasingly commercial, detached, polished. But through it all, every major artist carried a piece of him. Nas's poetry, Eminem's pain, Kendrick Lamar's defiance, J. Cole's introspection. Kendrick once said on stage, "Without Tupac, there's no me." He showed us that it's okay to be human and still be revolutionary. The echoes of Tupac's themes, injustice, betrayal, survival, became the DNA of modern hip-hop. Even those who never met him spoke of him as if they had. That's what happens when an artist's truth is so deep it outlives the body that carried it. In films, tributes, and samples, his image continues to evolve, both celebrated and commodified. Every few years, a new documentary promises to uncover the real Tupac. But those who truly listen already know, the real Tupac was never a mystery. He told us who he was again and again in every verse. "Only God can judge me. I'm not perfect, but I'm real. I'm a reflection of the world I came from." In 2016, Afeni Shakur passed away at age 69. When the news broke, fans around the world saw it as a closing of a sacred circle, the woman who gave Tupac his fire, finally joining him in peace. During her life, she had become the guardian of his voice. After her death, Amaru Entertainment and the foundation she built continued to carry his mission forward. The foundation's motto read simply, "We rise by lifting others." Afeni had once stood in courtrooms, pregnant, defending herself against conspiracy charges as a member of the Black Panther Party. She'd won that case without a lawyer, and decades later, her son would use her lessons to fight his own battles. Through lyrics instead of leaflets, microphones instead of megaphones. The connection between mother and son, two revolutionaries in different generations, became a powerful reminder that legacy is not inherited, it's earned. It's been nearly 30 years since the gunshots on Flamingo Road, and still, Tupac's words feel alive. In classrooms, students dissect Keep Your Head Up and Brenda's Got a Baby. In protests, his lyrics are chanted through megaphones. In prisons, his verses are read like scripture. In silence, his poetry is whispered by those who still believe in his message. He once said in a 1994 MTV interview, "I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world or change it, but I guarantee I'll spark the brain that will change the world." Those sparks are everywhere now. In 2012, a hologram of Tupac appeared on stage at Coachella, performing Hail Mary beside Snoop Dogg. It stunned the world, the illusion of resurrection. But for millions watching, it wasn't eerie. It was fitting. Tupac was always more spirit than flesh. In a way, he never left. Tupac Shakur's story is not just a story of one man. It's a story of America's contradictions. Art born from oppression, Hope born from pain, brilliance crushed by violence, yet somehow still undefeated. He was a rose that grew from concrete. And even after death, he kept blooming. The final truth of Tupac's life isn't hidden in police files or court documents. It's in the way his words still move people to think, to act, to question. He left behind a blueprint for resistance and a warning about fame, loyalty, and the cost of truth. If there's any justice in his legacy, it's that his message survived everything designed to bury it. As long as there are people searching for meaning in chaos. As long as there are young voices trying to be heard in a world that won't listen. Tupac lives. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with this story. Tupac Shakur's life wasn't about how he died. It was about what he stood for. And if his words still make you question, still make you feel, still make you think, then his mission succeeded. Subscribe if you haven't yet. Not for numbers, but because stories like this deserve to live on, just like the man who told them.